Okay, so we should be recording now.
All right, then. We'll call this meeting of the Public Works Committee to order. We have a quorum, and our first item of business is the minutes of March 22nd, 2021.
This is Robert. I would make a motion to approve the minutes.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
This is Susan. I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any discussion regarding the minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the minutes of March 22nd are approved. Item number 2 is 2021 street surface treatments, award of a bid.
Right, so we do this every year, of course, and we usually just get a couple of bidders. It's usually Farner Asphalt Sealers and Scott Construction. This year, a couple of other companies joined in, but Farner Asphalt Sealers had, I would say, by far the lowest bid, which was really favorable for us. So one of the things we're looking at is we're in the enviable position for once of being able to add some road segments to a list to maximize the surface treatment work that we can do this year. But the recommendation is to award it first to Farner Asphalt Sealers in the amount of $151,145 and to do a change order later.
Great.
All right, committee, any questions? Comments?
No?
No.
Do we
All
want to
right.
proceed to recommend the bid award?
Sure. This is Robert again. I would make a motion to recommend to the Finance Committee and Common Council award of construction contract to Farner Asphalt Sealers, LLC, in an amount not to exceed $151,145.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
This is Carrie. I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Sean, I have one question under discussion. How will you select additional streets somewhere along the line that might be subject to?
Yeah, Sean Ellsworth is taking a look at that right now. And we don't have a list just yet, but what he's looking at is what other roads are in reasonably good condition that haven't had surface treatment work done in several years. Because our whole goal with this program is to keep good roads in good condition. So,
Okay.
so he's trying to take a look at it with that eye.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and that will be our recommendation to the Finance Committee and the Common Council. Item 3 is Marigold Circle resurfacing, and again, a bid award.
Right, yeah, so we opened the bid for that. This also came in below our construction estimate, which is good news. And so the recommendation is to award this project to Wolf Paving in the amount not to exceed $152,398.
All right, committee, any questions, comments?
No again, so I guess start the ball rolling here. Recommend that we recommend to Finance and Common Council Wolf Paving Incorporated not to exceed $152,398.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second to that motion?
This is Carrie. I'll second that one as well.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Sean, this is Carl. I have a question. So this cost includes 700 square feet of sidewalk. So is that just, looking forward to our final discussion today, is that going to be paid for by the people who occupy that street, or?
I think normally when we do this kind of thing, these are curb ramps at crosswalks or common squares. So normally this kind of work is not accessible. It's just city paid.
Okay, so what is being new, I'd not understand what the mill and overlay definition is.
Yeah, it's sort of an older term, and we're trying to get away from that by just calling it resurfacing. But because mill is a particular way of removing asphalt by pulverizing it and feeding it in a conveyor into a truck. And it works really well for the kind of resurfacing where we're just doing partial depth. So if we have 4 inches of blacktop and we're just going to take off the top 2 inches or 1.5 inches and put an overlay on it, that's a rehabilitation of a street. But this is going to be full depth asphalt replacement. It's old enough and beat up enough. It just all has to go down to base and start over. So regardless of how the contractor removes it, whether with a backhoe or a mill, doesn't really matter to me. And it's not really an overlay. It's just replacement of full depth asphalt.
Well, to that point, and thank you for asking the question, Carl, because now that brings up a question for me. My understanding is typically we have like basically 3 levels of road repair, right? I mean, pothole filling is a little separate, but there's the crack seal basically, which is the road's in good conditions, but we're just trying to make sure that we're not leaving open cracks where water gets in and through heaving and ice and stuff like that makes it worse. So we try to seal it off. Great. The next level of higher cost, higher improvement is this mill and overlay. It's kind of like repair the road without total replacement, like even, I don't know what the right term is, underlayment or whatever, but it's like, it's the asphalt portion of the road. You kind of fix it. And then the total rehabilitation is you basically dig out that road and it's almost like you're starting from scratch. Is that, Sean, a kind of a good definition of the 3 levels that I think of?
I think that's probably a really good way to put it is, we're not doing underground utility work. We're not doing significant base course work, we hope. We're not doing significant curb and gutter replacement. It's really focused on just new asphalt. And whether that's partial depth or full depth is a little bit project dependent. And in this case, it's full depth. But so we're a little bit trying to get away from mill and overlay, and I'll remind Sean about that.
Okay.
So it sounds like this is in the middle of the 3, but maybe edging a little bit toward the higher end of that middle, because it's not just partial removal of the asphalt, it's pretty much all of full depth asphalt. Is that right? It's still not the most costly road repair, but it's getting up there.
Right. Yeah. If this were reconstruction, we wouldn't be talking about $150,000. We'd be a whole different scale. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that for me.
So Sean, then there's kind of actually a potential 4th degree of this repair also, and that's where you have to do some repair or replacement of the base course without doing underground utilities, but nonetheless beef up the base somewhat.
And that can happen on this kind of project too. So after we take all the asphalt off and strip it down to the gravel base, we'll drive a fully loaded dump truck on it and see once if it starts weaving and deflecting badly, we may have to do some undercut, which gets into then replacing some of the soft underlying subgrade materials, the native soils, and the base course. We always leave an allowance for that in our estimating, just in case we have to do some, but we don't really know until we get there what that's going to look like.
Okay, thank you. We haven't voted on this yet, I believe, have we?
We have not.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion to recommend this bid? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we will so recommend to the Finance Committee and the Common Council. Item number 4 is well number 3, rehab, acceptance of proposal. You want to walk us through this one a little bit, Sean?
Yeah, this is pretty similar to last year when we rehabilitated well number 2. And Dave Sarbacher, our utility manager, is on the call in case there are questions. But we solicited for proposals and got some back. And I could pop down to it, I guess. Strand had recommended that we accept the proposal from CTW in the amount of $59,010, which was corrected from the summation of proposals that got turned in a little bit. It wasn't significant, I would say. Just scroll down there. For those with vertigo, you may want to shield your eyes for a second. So that puts you in scale of the dollar signs of proposals that were submitted. And CTW's was turned in at $52,650, but it actually adds up to $59,010. So once we correct that, that's the recommendation, is to accept that proposal.
Sean, what specifically is the rehab work that has to be done here?
Oh boy, that I'll defer to Dave.
Okay.
If you want to unmute yourself, Dave.
Similar to what we did to well 8 2 years ago. The well is pulled out, inspected, the drive shaft, the columns, the bearings are all looked at, replaced or remachined. Pump is typically rebuilt. We take the electric motor in to have that serviced, and it's just a 10-year rotation on all these wells. Just preventative maintenance that we perform on each one of the wells every 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Have we worked with CTW in the past?
They actually did well 8 2 years ago.
2 years ago?
Yes.
Okay. And one other question, Sean, why was the math wrong on the proposal?
I don't know if they misadded lines 14 and 15, but that seems most likely is that they just missed these somehow.
I don't know. I think it might have been from page 1 to page 2 on the proposal that went out, and they must have added up page 1 and forgot the 2 lines that were on page 2 is what happened with those lines 14 and 15 on the copy that they sent in. So
That they missed those.
yeah,
That's about the dollar. That's
yeah,
about the dollar figure that's missing. So
yeah. So they counted up everything on page 1 and put the total on page 2 without adding page 2. Is what it amounted to.
And Sean and Dave, does that concern you at all? Like, I just, from a professional standpoint, but you want them to have their numbers correct, and just those kind of details just kind of put a little bit of red flag for me, but.
yeah, it happens. It's not terribly frequent, and we don't disqualify contractors for having made a math error, for having missed something or done some multiplication incorrectly. We typically do have a conversation with them, and I'm sure Strand did have that conversation with them about what got lost here, because we came up with a different number than you did. And it's usually in the context of, did you miss something that makes your underbid, something you can't stand behind? But when it's a simple math error, we can just correct it prior to award. If they turned in the wrong unit price, that's when we have a whole different tone to our conversation about there's no discretion there. That's not a math error. That's just a misbid. And we can't change that.
All right, any further discussion, committee?
I just have a quick question for more of just so I know. How long does this work take, and what happens while the motors and stuff are being looked at and disassembled and repaired? is it just like a rotation of they have one extra motor / pump system that they just switch them out, put in something else that's already in good condition, and then they have all the time in the world to refurb the motors and whatever they pull out? Or how does that work where they pull out something and we're not like down for 3 weeks with no ability to pump fresh water?
Yeah, I don't know how long this will take. It usually doesn't take a huge amount of time, but we do try to schedule it during an off-peak season
Okay.
for exactly that reason, because the well itself can't be used while this work's taking place. I mean,
Okay, that answers that question.
they'll physically be in that shaft with equipment and cameras and stuff. So the good news is that water systems are designed such that wells are out of service for exactly this reason. So,
Okay.
so we tend to have excess capacity.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, with that being said,
Well,
I will again make a motion to recommend to Finance and Common Council acceptance of the proposal from CTW in the amount of $59,010.
right, is there a second to Robert's motion?
I'll second, Don.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and that will be our recommendation to the Finance Committee and the Council. All right, that brings us to item 5, once again, new sidewalk construction policy.
Right. I know last time, oops, I'm going the wrong direction here. Last time the committee had asked that I take a look at our 5-year plan, which was just approved by the council as an update. And I've highlighted on this view the streets that also show up on our sidewalk gap map as missing sidewalks. And then I took that list and just ran a rough cost estimate of how many feet of sidewalk are missing and what their likely width would be for construction, and just applied a straight unit cost of $8 a square foot, which is pretty consistent with recent bid pricing. So that may not be consistent with bid pricing 5 years in the future, but I didn't try to account for that for this exercise. But I just wanted to get a rough scale for you of the dollar cost. If the city just said, we're not assessing sidewalk anymore at all, and we're going to install it on both sides of all streets, except around cul-de-sacs. So I took that sort of look at it. So you'll see on some of these streets where we've got sort of 2 entries per street. So if the street has no sidewalk at all, I took each side separately, so that it would be easy enough to say, you know what, on Spring Hill Court, we wouldn't put it on both sides. We would just put it on one side, in which case we could reduce this bill by $3,800. So at least we've got sort of a, maybe not maximum, but relatively high end of what the cost of all new sidewalk construction would be on each of the road segments where sidewalk is missing on either one or both sides. It just skips going around cul-de-sacs unless there's an interblock walk that we would want to connect to. If that makes sense.
So is there a reason why you didn't include Columbus Drive and Mayflower?
Columbus and Mayflower.
2024.
Oh, did I just miss that?
Might be because it wasn't in the 5-year plan because it was theoretically going to be done part of it this year.
Nope. Columbus up here from
there
Mayflower
it is.
Branch. I
Okay,
just
never mind.
didn't highlight it. I just flat missed it.
And Mayflower.
And that piece of Mayflower too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So So this is.
That's a big, that's a really a big number.
It is, yep. It is, yeah, so I'd have to redo this to catch those two.
And Sean, it seems like we always, you know, with the 5-year plan, I feel like we always bump roads down to the next year and things. So I'm almost wondering if, you know, just looking at your list, if we should almost, I guess it's fine to keep it the way it is because it's the 5-year plan, but just looking at it as an average cost per year might be helpful too, right? Just to kind of, if you go back to your estimate, where is it? Yeah, there. So, you know, in 2024, there's only 2, but I guess that needs sidewalks. But I'm just wondering, like, sometimes that actually doesn't happen, right? So it might be good to maybe look at this as a average cost per year. I don't know.
And that's been the hard part, right? So right now our policy says sidewalks are accessible. So even though we would have to front the money to collect it on the back end, we haven't tried figuring out how to include it in our planning for a project cost too much, partly because we don't know if the city's interested in building it or not. And even if we are interested in building it, it's an accessible and recaptured cost. So my impression of what the council wants is to figure out how to get close to a target budget of $2 million in every given year, ideally without going over, of sort of road improvement costs. And I think that's a big part of this exercise for policy discussion is how would it affect our approaching $2 million if the city wants to stop doing assessments or doing assessments at 50% as a change to what our policy is right now.
Well, it seems to me that in several years, if the city were to pick up the full cost of the sidewalks, given what is planned here, it would just about effectively wipe out the surface treatment portion of the road budget. I mean, you've got several numbers at 229,000. We allocate 250,000 roughly for those surface treatments, and in 2022, you've got 229,000. You get up to well over that in a couple of the years, and that I assume that's what would probably take the hit. Wouldn't have to, but then you would just be able to resurface that much less street.
And that would be a policy question, is if we want to take that off of surface treatments, and I would advocate not doing that as much as taking it off of road segments for reconstruction or resurfacing. And that's where we get back into bumping some of these other projects down in priority order then, is to say, well, if we're going to add missing sidewalks as part of our capital borrowing, and we're going to do surface treatments as part of our capital borrowing, then maybe we just have to start bumping down certain blocks or certain streets. But I think you're right. It's that scale of question. And I think that was the value of this exercise, is what scale are we talking about? But it's, let's say, $250,000.
John, could I say something?
Sure.
I've heard about this issue multiple times at multiple different committees. And we keep coming back to, okay, citizens don't like it. And the underlying reason is always they don't want to have to pay for the construction of it and then the cost of maintaining it for snow removal. And I'm thinking it's time to refer this with a nice summary to council and let them decide how they want to budget the money for doing this. We could, and you surveyed multiple municipalities to see how they do it. But it's ultimately a finance committee and council decision. And we can keep talking about it and talking about individual streets, but we're not getting anywhere. And it would be helpful for Public Works and to understand, okay, when we're budgeting for road repairs, do we include cost of sidewalks or do we not include them? So I think it's time to go to Council and Finance Committee.
With a recommendation, right?
Well, not necessarily, just say, you guys know city finances. Figure out, are we going to charge citizens or not charge citizens, or charge citizens for half of it?
Okay.
I think
Big
it's,
picture decision, not necessarily by projects or so on. Is what I'm
Kind of
talking.
ducking our responsibility if we do that.
I
We're not
don't think
making
so.
recommendation.
I think they're going to make whatever decision they want to at finance and then recommend on to council.
Well, they always do, but usually it's with a recommendation from us, whether either they abide by it or modify it or disregard it.
Oh, I would say this is slightly different in that it's not a specific project, but a big project that has impact on overall city finances. So it's impacting how much we borrow each year for roads, as opposed to, was this the lowest bid or something like that?
I like that idea, Susan, as well, just because I think it's also kind of an overall city strategy. Like if we're saying sidewalks are important for our citizens and for connecting and making our city more walkable, right? Just there's so many things that it impacts. And so I think it would be good to get their, if they're the ones leading the city, it'd be good to get their input on this. So maybe that's what our recommendation is to ask them, right? Like,
right. Well, what I've seen is we recommend conforming to having all the sidewalks. The issue is just, how does it get paid for? We support the sidewalk plan, but we haven't decided the specifics of who pays for what.
And is this discussion then this idea of referring the discussion and issue to the finance committee for the initial installation only, so that they catch up sort of to the baseline of the rest of the city? Or is it also looking forward for all future maintenance?
Okay, we've got two different issues.
They
I'm
are,
looking
yes.
at this for getting sidewalks installed everywhere that we should. And
Okay,
then there's the other issue of repair of sidewalks. I'm not including that.
okay. I just wanted to clarify. That's what I
Yeah,
thought
no,
we
that's a
were
good
talking about,
clarification.
but okay.
I guess I would say I agree that this should be recommended up to finance and common council for them to make the decision. I guess I would state that for this body, I would be willing today to actually put my vote toward city 100% financing this for basically some of the same reasons I mentioned 2 weeks ago, I guess, is that if we're just thinking of streets as infrastructure that the city has, decided to pay for and does not typically assess homeowners for, I think sidewalks and bike paths and stuff like that are equally part of our transportation infrastructure. And I think it's time for the city to say that those are equally worth funding from taxpayer funds as opposed to assessments. With that being said, I'm stating my viewpoint. If other people want to state their viewpoint, I think we could have a vote today on what our recommendation, not just to set it uphill, but what does Public Works say? If we're not ready to do that, or people don't feel like they have enough information today to make that decision, I'm also fine with just setting it up with no recommendation for or against as long as it still goes up before finance and public works. Or sorry,
Yeah.
finance and common council.
Robert,
Yeah,
are you
Robert, I
intending
guess
to reimburse people who have paid for sidewalks in the last 10 years?
No.
Isn't that pretty unfair?
Yes.
Like, we make policy decisions all the time that we don't grandfather in what our decision does to say everybody in the past, oh, well, we got to catch you up or do something different. Laws and policies and regulations and rules are, at some point you pull a trigger, and what went before and what came after are two different things from that decision point. I think I'm not opposed to having the discussion, but I personally do not think that this is something that would be retroactive or that we would do something different for people who paid in the past.
Isn't this more than a policy? I mean, I read you're going to have to change the ordinance, are you not?
That's why I believe you're probably correct. And based on what I've seen also, yeah, the ordinance specifically says this is an accessible item. And so to me, that would be an ordinance change. So yeah, I'm just stating, I think this is the direction I would, I would vocalize my support for it, and I'm vocalizing it here in Public Works, but I'll also vocalize it at other levels of city that I'm participating in.
I guess what I would really like to see is that we truly endorse the complete streets policy, which says we support having sidewalks everywhere. Then because we are not privy to all the city finances. Now, yes, you and I know a lot more about them than the other committee members, but I think it really, and since that's an ordinance change, letting council make that decision. But the important thing is we want to get all of our streets with complete sidewalks, and that we should be very adamant about. And then letting the council, who has to make decisions. And I'm saying this from a long time on council, where we've gone through different policies over the years, and it was about 5 years ago, we finally committed to spending X amount each year on roads. Before that, we simply based the decisions on, oh, this road is really bad. This is the worst one in the city. Therefore, that's the one we're going to fund. And then we've just borrowed enough money to cover it out of, I think we had a cap of about 2.5 million to spend, or 2 million at that time.
I think $2 million was the entire city capital budget.
And so those are decisions that council really needs to make, because we're also having to balance this against other projects too.
Understood. And I'm fine if there's no, other than a referral, if there's no actual recommendation from Public Works, I'm fine with that.
I guess what I'm saying, the recommendation is we completely support the complete sidewalks plan. And have we made that recommendation before?
I think the
But
city was in favor of that. but-
Still doesn't get you to the point of whether or not the city ought to be paying for the sidewalk. You can recommend the complete sidewalks plan, but then you have to somehow come to grips with, is this going to be under our current assessment policy,
Well,
a modified assessment policy, or the city pay all policy?
my motion would be that finance and council make that decision.
So Susan, before you do that, and before you send a letter through, without all of the information in front of them, I can see where let's let the city pay for it. But there's a cost to that. And it's not just dollars and cents to pay for the sidewalks. It's what streets don't we do? And
Right, well, that's why we have the 5-year plan.
Well, that's, takes the 5-year plan and throws it again out the window. I mean, it gets thrown out the window every year, but this would
Well,
dramatically.
this, I'm looking at this as
Of
a,
$229,000 in 2022, for example, and that would just take out that street job that we just approved, which,
But I'm
No,
wondering,
but
is
I'm
this
looking
Susan,
at-
is it, I was gonna say, Susan, are you saying though that potentially the finance committee would come up with a different way to pay for these sidewalks? It wouldn't necessarily have to take away from our road projects.
that's correct.
Oh,
I'm saying the
But what
5-year
else
plan
don't you
stays
do?
the same. Council has to figure out how they're gonna pay for it.
Right.
I would agree
Either
the council
borrow some
could do
extra
that.
money or have residents pay for it.
Yeah,
Well, they
I-
already have figured that out. I mean, that's what's in the ordinance. I mean, what reason
Well,
do they
that's
have?
what we keep arguing about every year.
Yeah, I think we're
Yeah.
trying to raise the question again, right? To say like, hey, here's the issue. And we think that the city should pay for streets. And our question to you is, where does that money come from?
Right.
We don't want it
And
to
s-
impact the road budget. Is there a different option?
Yeah, and I think we could put in the motion, we don't want it to impact the road budget of spending, how much is it now, Sean? 2,500 or 2,000? 2 million, I'm sorry.
Really?
$2 million, right? And I think
We
the
would like
finance
to
committee and
continue spending-
council have both been really clear that that $2 million number isn't likely to change. I mean, it's not going to become 2.25.
Right,
Well, then there isn't any alternative if the decision is for the city to pick up some or all of the cost of doing sidewalks in conjunction with these projects, that there will be fewer road projects done because that's the only place the money's going to come from.
the council can borrow more money.
Well, but if,
Well,
They
I
can
think
decide
they've
to borrow
told me
more
several
money.
times that's not happening. And I'm okay with that. I think budgeting is prioritizing, right? Everybody
Yeah.
knows this. So
Mhm.
I don't think it's a bad question to ask, do they want to change policy? Do they want to reprioritize how we spend $2 million? That's a fair question. But I think if we go to them and say, hey, we'd like our 2 million to raise up to 2.25 million, I think it's just going to be a really short discussion.
But I like
And
your
is that
point, Sean, that
2.25?
maybe, oh, go ahead, Susan.
Is it 2.25 every year? That's my
Well,
point is we have a short time span of road projects that clearly need additional sidewalks. And then after that, it's going to change.
it's maybe not every year. And like Carl pointed out, this number is just bad. So if you look at the rest of the numbers, it's going to be a while before
you're
we
out,
catch up on
Susan,
all
you're
the
out.
sidewalks.
with this chart, you're out at least 5 years.
Right.
And
An
I mean,
average of 250 or maybe even a little bit more, you know,
Is
per
that
year.
250 a year?
250 a
Yeah.
year.
Now that depends too. I mean, if we want to
Yeah,
build
it
sidewalks
depends.
along both sides of Eagle Drive and along both sides of Murphy Drive, I mean, someone else has to answer that question. This is,
well, Sean, if you pull that stunt, well, we're only gonna put it on the south side. I can imagine every
Yeah.
north side resident who's now is not getting a free sidewalk will say, well, why didn't I get my free sidewalk?
yeah.
They got it on
I
the
think-
south.
I'm not sure that also matches the complete streets policy.
Right.
Exactly.
And-
I just
and-
think it's embedded in that policy decision. It's a fair point.
I mean, the whole reason we discuss this every year is because the citizens complain they don't want to pay for it. It's
Yeah.
the only reason we discuss it. It's a policy.
Right. So let
Well, it's also,
council
yeah,
deal
it's a
with it.
policy and an ordinance.
And an ordinance, and it just makes it so that we have, 2 or 3 hour public hearings with people complaining about sidewalks every year.
Can I speak to Middleton Beach Road at this point?
That's up to the chair, Bob.
well, I'm sorry, you are whom?
I'm Jenny Corwin. I'm president of Middleton Beach Road Neighborhood Association. And
Well-
I do have some questions because Middleton Beach Road is on the reconstruction plan for 2022. And I'm interested in learning more about the impact of sidewalks with that, or do we have to put in sidewalks at the same time that the road is reconstructed? How wide would the sidewalks be? You say people want sidewalks. In our case, our neighbors prefer not to have a sidewalk. So I'd be interested in knowing if we have some other options or how this policy really affects what we're doing as we get into design work.
Well, I don't think we're really ready to get into specifics about Middleton Beach Road at this point. This is a policy decision that is much bigger than Middleton Beach Road. None of the design work has begun on Middleton Beach Road. So I don't know that there are specific questions that we can answer for you. I mean,
Well, it's an example of, do we have to have a sidewalk? Can the neighbors have a say in that? It sounds like you've pretty much made the decision that every street should have a sidewalk, if I'm understanding your discussion right.
that's the question that we are trying to get some clarity on. The complete streets policy, which the city has adopted, basically says streets are supposed to have sidewalks.
Okay. And how wide would that sidewalk be? Are you showing, like when you show 5 feet, is that the width that you're talking about?
New sidewalks are 5 feet, except where they connect to existing sidewalks, as I understand it anyway, except where they connect to existing sidewalks, which are 4 feet. And then they would be 4 feet.
Yeah, if it's a short gap. If it's longer, then we would transition from 4 feet to 5 feet and extend it at 5 feet.
Thank you.
Okay.
So what have been I think I know, but the recommendations from both Plan Commission and Bike Ped were to support the complete streets policy. Is that correct?
They were in support of the comprehensive plan, and I believe they were in support of complete streets as well, which is mirrored in the comprehensive plan.
Right. So this is where I think, again, it needs to go to council because we've got 3 different committees. So we could decide not to support the complete streets, and Bike Ped and Plan Commission do. And then council needs to make that decision.
Well, I think
And then there's
Public Works
how do we
Committee has
pay
been
for
in favor of sidewalks too. I think the big question here is, I don't hear committees talking against sidewalks except in limited instances where it's just
Right.
infeasible or isn't practical. But as a prevailing design element to favor it, if at all possible. The real
Then would it-
question is, how do we pay for that?
Yeah, then would it be, has Public Works voted only just on the issue of, do we support complete sidewalks?
Geez,
I don't
I don't
think
remember
we ever specifically
specifically.
voted on that question, Susan. We did vote to approve that section of the comprehensive plan that dealt with the complete streets policy.
Right.
Oh,
I'm just thinking, do we want to split this into 2 issues or
Well,
2 motions?
again, I think the city council has already endorsed complete streets. And
Yeah.
if we're not asking them not to endorse it, it doesn't feel to me like a
Okay,
question.
so if we don't feel like we need to endorse complete streets, we're back to who pays for it.
I think that's where we are, yeah.
that's where we started,
Okay.
and I think that's where we still are.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's a good point, Susan. Though I think you were trying to just understand, do we as a committee feel like sidewalks are important, right? Like, what
Yes.
are our committee members feeling about? And I think that what we've been doing is kind of looking at it as a case-by-case basis, and that approach is okay. But like we've talked about, every time that there's sidewalks that need to be placed into a neighborhood, people don't like it, right? They don't want to have to pay for it. They don't want to have to maintain it. And so we have these long meetings and discussions, and I think that's what we're talking about, is that if we eliminated the cost, I feel like sidewalks would be more agreeable with people, right? Like it would, and like what you were saying, Robert, I think you phrased it really well, better than what I'm saying right now, is that it's part of the transportation infrastructure, just like bike paths and roads and sidewalks. It should all be funded. And I agree with that. And I agree with you, Robert. I would be ready to support that if we wanted to, and have the question go to council saying, you know, we think there could be a policy change, an ordinance change, and we want to come to you with how would we, is there a different option for funding this besides the, you know, either bumping up, I guess, the $2 million budget, or is there other options, right? Could it be paid for in other ways? I guess that's the question to council or the finance committee.
Yeah. So Robert, you're suggesting we make a motion to have the city fund the sidewalks completely.
I'm suggesting, for the point of conversation within Public Works, that we, as a group, vote on what we recommend. And I don't know that the votes are even here in Public Works to do that. But yeah, I guess if I were the one making the motion, and I kind of wanted to hear people out a little bit, I would say that we actually would recommend to Finance and Common Council that the city pay 100% for new sidewalks in developed neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks. And that's very specific. It doesn't talk about maintenance. It doesn't talk about greenfield, development of green sites or anything like that, where maybe a contractor or somebody, developer, would be putting in the sidewalks in a completely new environment. But I'd say for houses that, were built in the past without a sidewalk in front of them, I think we want to get those sidewalks put in as a city. That's one of our stated goals. And I think one of the best ways to reach that stated goal is for the city to invest in that level of transportation infrastructure that deals with the installation of those new sidewalks in developed areas that don't have sidewalks currently.
Okay, could we go one step further and require in new developments that the developer pay for the sidewalks?
And
That's
that
the
is our
policy now.
policy.
Isn't it? That's not changing anything.
Well, I guess
Well,
actually technically our policy is that Plan Commission decides that, but what the Plan Commission decides is funded by the developer. Public improvements are funded by the developer.
Just make it
That's-
really clear that the developers going forward pay for the sidewalks.
Yeah.
So we don't get back in this situation again.
Yeah, we're not having that problem right now. I mean, when the Plan Commission says this needs sidewalks, Chapter 19 of our subdivision ordinance already says that.
Yeah, and Robert's motion only covers existing developed neighborhoods.
Right.
Right.
I just want to be sure that Plan Commission doesn't change their mind.
And I understand, and I think it's a good point, Susan. I'm trying to carve out a very specific motion for recommendation to Finance and Common Council. And as I said, that would be my motion. I don't know if anybody would want to second it, and I don't know what the feelings of this body are, but my motion, and I guess I'm making it officially now, my motion is that we recommend to Finance and Common Council that the city pay 100% of the price or the cost of putting in sidewalks into areas within our city that currently don't have sidewalks, but that are already developed. there are houses there or whatever. And if we want a sidewalk there, we pay for it. Granted, there is also going to be this, I just diverged from my motion now because it's still along the lines of if Sean and his team look at it and say, well, we can't put a sidewalk in a certain area because there's a really steep hill there, or there's a swamp there, or whatever it is. Okay, we're going to still use common sense to say certain areas are still not going to get a sidewalk because.
Well, what about going with the sidewalk guidelines that have already been proposed?
Right. I'm not trying to change the guidelines. I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, so make the motion to go with the guidelines, the current proposed guidelines.
Or just as feasible, and we'll figure it out as we get into design.
Well, how about, as feasible. And Sean, I apologize, that was a wandering motion. Did you get the gist of it?
Yeah, and we have it on videotape, so.
Yeah, well, a wandering motion on videotape is no better.
So-
For the benefit of our committee, can you read back my poorly stated motion?
Yeah, I would say that Burke recommended that the committee recommend to Finance Committee and the Common Council that the city pay 100% of the costs for construction of new sidewalks as feasible along existing developed streets as an investment to reach the pedestrian connectivity goal of the city.
So much better than what I said, but
Yeah,
Could I
I
make
guess,
one suggestion along with that? And that is not, just to clarify, you're making that motion in that these sidewalks be constructed in conjunction with street improvement projects. We're not suggesting that that be a separate undertaking in the city.
you are correct that this would be, from a timing standpoint, it would be tied to our 5-year, whatever street development plan. We'd kind of try to tackle only those streets where we're already working on those streets at any particular year. So
I think that's a useful clarification.
that is, I still would like to see us supporting the sidewalk guidelines in the comprehensive plan.
Sure. I think Don also might have had a.
Mine was the same as Bob. Thanks,
Oh,
Bob. I
see?
agree with you totally. And then
Great minds
when
think
it
alike.
goes to finance.
My mind reading class is paying off.
Make
So you're-
sure finance knows
so
that
we're
there's
not gonna
delays for the
have-
projects.
Oh, go ahead, Carl, sorry.
So the motion does not include increasing the capital plan. So we're going to reduce the amount of street construction every year.
I don't
No,
know. I don't know what finance or common council will do. And honestly, Carl, that may be the sticking point that kills the whole thing. But I am not making any recommendation as to how finance or the common council deal with that, whether they increase their spending or decrease their linear distance of roads worked on in any particular year. I will leave that up to people who know more about the money side of things than I can speak to.
Robert, we've gotten back to what I was proposing.
Possibly, but I feel, I feel more comfortable with my phrasing of it than yours, I guess. But
Yeah,
But I think, Robert, implicit in your motion, given what your understanding and Susan should be specifically, and I know Sean's is, that the council is not going to be very favorably disposed toward increasing the total amount of money that goes toward road projects. That implicit in your motion is that this is going to come at some sacrifice to the road improvement projects that we have been embarked upon for the last several years. And while I think we've made a lot of progress in getting a lot of those done, there are still quite a few that have to be done. And that seems year in and year out on the citizen satisfaction surveys to be one of the top, if not the top issue that people want the council and the city to undertake, is improving the streets in Middleton. And this, I think, implicit in your motion is, it's a step forward for the sidewalk plan. I think it's a step backward for the street improvement projects, because that money's going to come from somewhere. And if I understand how things work at the council level, it's going to, you got a pot, you want to take $250,000 a year out to do sidewalks, that's $250,000 we don't put into a street or several streets.
Or into parks or conservancy or police equipment or the
Well,
library.
I know, but I don't even want to consider getting in a fight with any of those other departments and constituencies. I'm just thinking about within the realm of public works is where it's going to get paid for.
Sure. I agree with what you said. I would say it's not implicit in my motion in so much as it is a consequence of my motion, but I think for your purposes, it's the same. For our decision making, yes, I think more likely than not, finance and or common council would say, if this goes forward, the only place that money will come out of is the $2 million budget for roads. And so I wouldn't go as far as saying it's part of my motion or it's implicit in my motion, but it is a logical consequence of my motion.
Yes. And I mean, I understand that the council and the finance committee have the authority to make that decision. But from my perspective, I would just as soon not have it come on my recommendation or, you know, I would sooner stay true to the roads budget. And if the council wants to add some more money to do sidewalks, that's fine. And you can do the sidewalks and assess them the way that we have always assessed them in Middleton to the individual property owners in those areas where we decide to do the sidewalks. Now, there've been, what, 2 projects in the last 2 years that we've done where this would now, I guess, if this policy that you're suggesting was in place, if that would have come into play, we would have put sidewalks in on Wood Drive or whatever, and we would have put sidewalks in on those courts in Parkside Heights or whatever, if we would have had the money from the city to pay for them. But the decision was made not to do that. And now in the future, there wouldn't be any decisions not to put the sidewalks in because it's the city capital expense.
Sure.
Okay, well,
I guess I think we need to consider our citizens and what in terms of these decisions that we've made, they've been very tough and contentious. And we chose not to put some in. And then there are other places where even though citizens don't want them, for some really significant safety reasons, we need to be sure we get them put in. And that's where having the city pay for them is the way to get it done.
well, that eliminates one obstacle. I mean, some of the objections to the sidewalks have not been voiced based on the cost of them. They just don't want sidewalks in their neighborhoods.
Cost.
It's hard to say though without the cost factor. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, I agree.
it's
But
hard to really know what people's true reasons are.
Bob, Rick Eilertson has had his hand up for a while too. Do you mind if he participates?
no, that's fine. I can't see anybody's hands up, so
Okay.
that's fine. Go ahead, Rick.
Oh, Rick, you're muted right now. Can you unmute yourself?
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Sean. So while I'm not a Middleton resident, I do work at in Middleton at 1350 Deming Way at AECOM. I've been real involved with American Public Works Association, and if there's interest, I can actually pass along a recent webinar, a Lunch and Learn webinar that we did on transportation utilities. So that's just another creative way of getting at kind of alternative funding for transportation improvements. Sidewalks could be part of that. Typically, it's more roadway construction. So there is a process that the city would need to go through in order to set up a transportation utility. But it would be set, it could be set up somewhat similar to the stormwater utility, for example, for Middleton. So that I like Robert's motion because it doesn't deal with the budget at this time. It's just describing the policy and saying this is what we should be doing. And then we can figure out, you know, other entities can figure out exactly the metrics for financing those improvements. And if there's interest, I can pass along some further information to Sean of the transportation utility option. It's just another way that the city could just remove barriers to things like you know, getting sidewalks or other public improvements in.
Thank you.
Could I comment on that? I think the idea of the transportation utility is great, but there is one huge problem in that it would have to go to public referendum to all the residents in the city.
Okay.
And that would be tough. Unless you included all roads in it.
And a
And then
different
reduce their
option,
property taxes by X amount.
a different option would be, and I know the motion incorporates now that we would do this in conjunction with street reconstruction or resurfacing projects. But it would be a different option for the council to say, you know, we're committed to doing $150,000 or $200,000 of sidewalk improvements in priority order, independently of road projects, and just start chipping away at this backlog. It wouldn't have to be variable funding in any given year, and concrete contractors aren't necessarily married to asphalt contractors anyway. It might be a different way to go.
It might be, and I appreciate the comment, and I don't disagree with you. I guess I would let finance and the common council, you know, figure out where they want to change this or modify it. I think I would leave my recommendation as I've made it, with the help of Bob to at least clarify the timing of it. And then, you know, that would still be my recommendation, but I think I'm the only one so far who I've made a motion and I have not yet heard a second, and that's
Well,
fine.
where I was going to get back to here. We
That's a
have a
good
motion
point.
on the floor. Do we have a second to Robert's motion? And then we can continue discussion if we do.
This is Carrie. I'll second Robert's motion.
All right, so we have a motion and a second, and now we can have further discussion on the motion.
Let me raise my hand here to Sean's comment on just, or whose comment was to do $200,000 a year in sidewalks. The coordination of that would just really blow up the 5-year plan, because you'd have to, for example, Columbus, when you do that, you're changing the road width in order to do the sidewalks. So that would have to be well coordinated as well. And there'd have to be some more or better, I guess, long-range planning with the road plan.
Yeah, that's a good
But
point.
it's a good idea. I mean, yeah, it's great. And if you only had to spend 150 there, you could find 50 to put somewhere we didn't put them in last year.
That's where I was thinking, is the advantage would be that we could go after highest priority sidewalk connectivity issues first, instead of wondering what road is next.
Yep.
But it does have that coordination need in design.
Yeah, there are points in favor of either of those approaches, I guess, but it would make it much more difficult to lay out the road projects in the future if you'd already done the sidewalk.
I think we should decide that after we find out where the money's going to come from.
Yeah. So the motion includes that.
All right, is there further discussion on the motion? Are we ready to vote?
Sure.
Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of Robert's motion signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. Nay.
Okay.
I think I heard 2 opposed. Is that Bob and Carl?
I think that's what I heard as well.
Or should we roll call that? I just want to be sure I'm getting it right.
I think, Don, not to put you on the spot, the only one I wasn't sure of was you. Were you a yay
Oh,
or a nay?
I said yes. I just totally convinced it's not going to go anywhere when it gets to finance. Yes, I said
You
yes.
could,
Did
you
it
could
there
very
for
well be
ethics.
right. But if my math is right, then that's a 4-2-4 vote.
Yes,
That's what I was just drafting. I'll write it as 4-2 with Lyons and Stump opposed. Is that
I
correct?
think that's, Dan Coach did not make the meeting. Is that correct? Is Dan out there
Dan-
somewhere?
Dan did not join us, correct?
Okay. All right, so then I think it's 4-2 in favor of the motion. And that we will send along to the council and the finance committee and wait for them to act on it and send us some more money to do sidewalks.
And I can't remember, Dan might have told me that he wouldn't be able to make this meeting, or it might have been the next one.
Sure.
I honestly can't remember. So.
Okay. All right then. I think that completes our agenda.
That is, yes. So a motion to adjourn would be in order.
It is.
This is Carrie. I'll motion to adjourn.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
This is Robert. I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Hey, Ginny. Hi, Ginny.
Yes.
If you have, so I'm an alder, not for your district, but can I give you my home telephone number if you have questions about some things? I just, before the Zoom meeting closes, I just wanted to be able to talk with you, and I don't know how to get a hold of you.
Oh,